Okay, so with that, we bring our, I would like to give a strong welcome for our speaker, Miriam. And so take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's my first time being to one of these meetings, so I don't know exactly how it works. I made a pretty long slideshow, so I talk about my whole career and I do a reading from my work in progress at the end. So if that sounds good.
That sounds great.
Okay, I will launch into that. Oh, I need a screen sharing though.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Let me make sure you can do that. Okay, now you can do that.
Okay, great. Okay. So let's get, so are you able to see a poorly computer rendered comic page?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So yeah, so this is my first comic ever. So that was in my second year of university. So I grew up in Ohio, then I moved to Israel kind of at the end of high school. I finished high school early and went for a year program in Israel, and then that turned into 4 years, the last 2 of which were in the Army, the IDF. And then right after that, as soon as I was discharged, I came back and I started university, first in Seattle, and then I transferred up to Emily Carr in Vancouver, and I've kind of been in the Vancouver area ever since. So when I started art school, as the first time I ever tried making a comic, and it was based, as you might guess, on my Army diaries. So the first comics I made were autobiographical, and they were in Adobe Illustrator, which I was, just learning. It was for actually a digital visual art class where they were teaching us Photoshop and Illustrator. And I'm still not very good at Illustrator. And I certainly was not great here. A lot of, shapes don't even meet up, as you can see. But I'm glad that I took the first step, even and especially in a medium that I was not comfortable in, because it actually was very well received by fellow students. Like, they thought the story was interesting. They really wanted to read more about it. And yeah, so I just kind of took a diary entry of mine from one of my worst weeks in the Army and put it to pictures. So it was just a short 5-page comic. And so that kind of quickly became my my chosen medium, and my chosen format in the medium was I decided I wanted to tell my Army stories, and I wanted to tell the story of my Army service from beginning to end. And I was definitely I kind of had discovered Phoebe Gleckner right at the time, so if I could get any sort of sexual trauma in there, I was eager to put it in there. And very personal stuff, because that was the kind of comics I like to read. And I started selling them at Comic-Con. This was one of my, so this is WonderCon 2008, says the badge. So I started in 2005. APE 2005 was my first show, and I consider exhibiting at Comic-Cons to be a really important step in my comics career, because again, it made me feel like I had a reason to keep putting out issues. I decided to do it in zine format because I could finish short stories. So I just continued over the next few years of undergrad to try to finish 1 or 2 issues a year, and then just go to a lot of the cons on the West Coast as much as I could. And the shirt that I'm wearing says Bakesh Shalom Veradfehu, which means desire peace and chase after it. It's from a psalm. And I took 1 screen printing class in art school, and then just started screen printing up a storm as well, because people at Comic-Con seems to like those as well. So yeah, so as I said, I started putting out issues. I called the comic Jobnik. Jobnik means a non-combat soldier. And so that's kind of, I wanted to make clear that that's what I was, that these kind of army stories are not the glamorous or the violent kind. But it was more sort of the teen angst and just culture shock and culture clash kind of army stories. And yeah, eventually I did get enough of those together for a graphic novel, and I self-published this graphic novel. Okay, I see that what the t-shirt says was even a question, so I'm glad I addressed that. Yeah, so this was my first self-published graphic novel, and that was in 2008. I did send my comics to different publishers, periodically, to Top Shelf and Fantagraphics and First Second. But I got very nice rejection letters, but nobody wanted to publish it, so I published it myself. And another thing I kind of started doing at the end of art school, so this was my senior project in art school, was a graphic essay called Toward a Hot Jew. And so it was kind of about, that I had been living outside of Israel for like 3 years then, so almost as long as I had lived in Israel. But I still had family there, so I would still go back and visit. And I would take a lot of pictures because by then I was writing my army comics. So I was like, I need to take a lot of research pictures of the country and stuff. But I would take a lot of candid photos. This is not an example of one. This is based on a famous photograph. But I would take a lot of candid photos of, just soldiers out in public. And then later when I would look at all these photos that I took, I would be like, I feel like I'm, as a photographer, I'm just casting them in such this romantic and attractive light all the time, that I'm really glamorizing Israeli soldiers when I take pictures of them. And yet, when I was an Israeli soldier, I did not feel glamorous or hot or, mythical, heroic, or any of that stuff. And so I was like, why did I revert back to this sort of really romantic and heightened version of Israeli soldiers? And so that's what this essay was about. So I incorporated traced photos, such as this one, which is a very famous photo from 1967 of Israeli paratroopers capturing the Western Wall in Jerusalem, capturing East Jerusalem. But most of the traced photos were my own photos that I had taken. And then I, had text over top of it, which again, if I was making this comic today, I would have left more white space under the text, so it was easier to read. But, we all have to try things in order to see why it doesn't work. Yeah, so this one, I call it a drawn essay, and using drawn was actually influenced by Donna, who I had met at Comic Cons. I really like that she called her books drawn books, because for me the important part was the act of drawing, like the text was drawn and the people were drawn. And so that seemed to me better than calling it a graphic essay, because a graphic, like, still, when you put the word graphic on anything but novel, it seems to mean, like overly filthy, right? Or overly explicit. So again, like calling it a graphic essay, that just didn't feel right. Although now the term has really taken off, which kind of makes me wish that I had called this one in 2006 a graphic essay, because then I could have claimed to have started the genre, or at least been the first thing to call itself a graphic essay, even if other people have been experimenting with other kinds of non-narrative nonfiction in comics form before 2006, certainly. But it definitely was not the phenomenon it is now, and so maybe I was at one of the starts of a trend, who knows. But yeah, I did start to get a little bit of attention, even though I was self-publishing. So this is in the Jewish Daily Forward, back when it actually had a print edition. And so this is my kind of first press that was actually printed and widely distributed, and this was in New York, the Jewish newspaper. and so this was pretty interesting that I was at MoCA, and somebody came and talked to me, and then I got this really cool write-up, and a lot of people got in touch with me after that. You know, I was still just self-publishing off my website, so it's not like I was making sales huge amounts, but I did get a lot of interesting emails, as well as people I'd collaborate on with later. Another kind of, this weird thing happened to the text here. Another cool thing that happened, maybe from that article, probably from that article, is I was actually contacted by the army newspaper, Bamachane, the Israeli army newspaper, which is a weekly newspaper that maybe it's not in print anymore either, but it would go out to all the bases every week. And so it was just kind of a news and culture newspaper aimed at Israeli soldiers, and they had a write-up of my comics. So I thought that was a pretty cool achievement when that happened. So there's some stills. So there's a cover from Jobnik, as well as one of the images from Torah, or two of the images from Torah Hut Jew. And the top one, which was a little bit more of a comics journalism about the Second Lebanon War in summer of 2006. Yeah, and another thing that came out from exhibiting at MoCA that one time was another reporter came by and talked to me, and he wrote an article that he was like, I feel like there is a trend of Jewish women doing confessional comics. So he kind of wrote this trend piece about, so I was there, Sarah Glidden was there, Miss Lasco Gross was there. I think that was all of us that was there at MoCA. But then, of course, you know, if you start thinking about Jewish women doing confessional comics, then, what's her name? So sorry, there's one more. She's from Florida, and her picture is in here, but I forget her name. And she might have also been at MoCA at that time. Like she's around the same age as well. But you know, if you think about Jewish women doing confessional comics, obviously Aline Kaminsky-Crumb comes to mind, as well as the late Diane Newman, the late and definitely missed Diane Newman. And so he kind of wrote that article, and then Sarah Lightman, who was doing a Master of Arts in the UK, and she was getting a degree in curating, but she also kind of secretly did autobio comics. So she contacted the guy that wrote the article, and they put together an exhibit about Jewish women doing confessional comics. And that exhibit toured different places around the world for like 9 years. So I sent stuff to be in the exhibit, and it would, you know, travel to new cities every a couple of times a year, and then I would, you know, hear back from those places. So my art was just going and traveling without me. And then they put together a book of essays about that exhibit. And this is the cover of that book. Oh, so this was the original. Yeah, Vanessa Davis was the other person I was thinking of. So this was the original article that ran and that led to the exhibit, and then led to the book. And then that led to me getting to go up on stage at the Eisners with Trina Robbins, because our editor is in the UK and she couldn't come out. So this is definitely a career highlight for me. Not my Eisner, but I got to go up and give a speech and accept it. And with Trina Robbins, who's definitely been a hero of mine, and I've been able to collaborate with her on some things as well. And so, yeah, so sort of the drawn essay or the graphic essay is also, you know, a form that I've continued to work in, because I felt like my Jobnik series had kind of a set style and it had a set narrative. And I was committed to telling that story, and I was interested in telling that story, and other people were interested in it. But sometimes I would just get too bored. And so I felt like the graphic essays was where I could experiment more with style. And whenever I just kind of felt like I had a burning issue that I wanted to talk about, that I either wanted to, you know, grab people by their shirt fronts and tell them, this is what you don't understand about, you know, X, or something that was really bothering me that I didn't understand, then I would work through it in the comics. So this was another one where I was asked to write something for an anthology that was coming out. And they just said, you know, we just want you to write about how you started making comics. but it was going to be an academic anthology, and it was put out by Rutgers University Press. And I was like, well, if I have this opportunity, I'm going to write a full, I'm going to write a research essay, but obviously it's going to have a lot of personal stuff in it also. I'm going to write both and in comics form. And so, yeah, so that was the anthology that it went into, and I got to do the cover also. So that was in 2008, I think, and that was kind of my first paid illustration job that I got to do the cover. They added all those cheesy sound effects. I hoped that it would be clear enough that they were reading comics at the Western Wall. Maybe it wasn't clear enough, but they added all those sound effects to make sure you knew that comics was what was happening, of those people praying at the Western Wall. So some of my graphic essays then also were supposed to be a little bit more journalism-y. So this was one about refugees from Sudan and Darfur in Tel Aviv, that at first they were welcomed, but then they were never given any kind of legal status. So they couldn't legally work, and they couldn't legally, rent homes or do a lot of other things. So they kind of became this underclass in Tel Aviv, doing all sorts of gray market sort of things. And then they were getting scapegoated for violence, and there was a lot of like racist incitement against them. So I wasn't even in Israel at the time. I was home with my first baby, but I was just really bothered by all this stuff going on. And so I made an essay where it's kind of a long distance view. So it's my thoughts, and then the other colored lettering is like news articles and stuff that I brought into it. And so as you can see, I could experiment also more with art styles in the shorter pieces. So I did get into watercolor more and started, kind of developing a voice in watercolor. Yes, that was me writing with my first baby. And she's chewing on my scripts. So one thing that happened when I was home on maternity leave, and here in Canada, if you work full time, then you get a full year of paid maternity leave, and it's pretty awesome. And so, during that year, I got to kind of sit and think about, what do I want to do with my life while my baby chewed on things. And that's when I decided that I wanted to go for an MFA, because I really liked teaching. When I had ever gotten the chance to teach, like I taught one continuing studies class at my alma mater, at my old art school, and I really, really liked it. It was about, drawing memoir comics, but they offered it to me once and they never offered it to me again. And I kind of contacted them and I was like, what can I do to get hired, in a more permanent capacity? And they're like, well, you'd pretty much have to have a master's degree. So I had chewed on that for a little while, because at first I resisted getting a master's degree, because I didn't think it would make me a better artist. I thought if I wanted to be a better artist, I just have to draw more. But I did want to teach. And so I interviewed, I went and just had some information interviews with people in different departments at University of British Columbia, which is the biggest university here. And in the art department, they still were like, we don't know about comics. Like, maybe you could get in on a portfolio as long as you took all your comics out and made it look like you just do figurative painting. And then for 2 years while you're in your program, just do figurative painting and don't turn in any comics. And then after you get your degree, you can be a cartoonist again. And then I went to the creative writing department, and they're like, wow, we love Graphica. It's such an exciting new, form of literature, and we really want to expand our Graphica department, and that's great. So I was like, okay, creative writing it is. And so I went back to school, and I had a toddler, and I was commuting a ways. I was commuting quite a ways from the suburbs, and so I was drawing in coffee shops a lot and inking in coffee shops, as you can see here. And so this was kind of my longest essay that I did, and this was one of the ones I worked on when I was in grad school, which is about the Ethiopian Jews who immigrated to Israel in the early 1990s. and some in the 80s as well. And sort of the, that it's always been presented as this really heroic and inspiring story, which parts of it are, but also, pretty much as soon as they got there, they faced really, they faced some pretty bad racism, which just seems so weird and out of context. Like, it's not like they had 200 years of history and slavery of stuff like that. It's like they were fresh and new in the country, and then suddenly all this racism just fell down upon them. And so that was kind of something I wanted to explore. And then that led, of course, to, as an American Jew, you think about that in the early to mid 20th century, American Jews were very involved in the civil rights movement, or certainly that's how we like to think of ourselves. And then in the late 60s to 80s, there was sort of this breaking of the relationship, and what did that entail? So that's another thing I kind of explore in this essay. And then while I was still in school, I had a second baby. And so this is one of my favorite pictures, because he's sleeping on the table, and I'm doing my screen prints. So I kept doing screen printing because that's actually most of what sells for me at Comic Cons. But I just run it all off, at home in my basement. So this was the experience of continuing to do Comic Cons, continuing to be a grad student, and there's a baby plopped in the middle of it. But yeah, so after, I guess, 10 years after my first drawn essay, I had enough of these short essays put together that I could pitch that again as a book. And this time it was accepted by Fantagraphics. So I kind of sent it around to all the places, and this time Fantagraphics said yes to it. And then that was published in 2016. And it actually won a Canadian Jewish Literature Award. So, and that was pretty cool, because, I don't know if a comic had ever won that award before. But it didn't get a ton of attention, but it got some very nice attention. And then this is the work in progress that I'm going to read from soon, but also my MFA thesis that is still, the art is still in progress. Like, I made enough of it to graduate. But so this is my high school graduating class. This is my entire high school graduating class. I went to a very small Jewish day school in Columbus, Ohio. So Columbus is not a very Jewish town, but there were enough of us that, some people had established a Jewish day school. And when I started out, they didn't even have a high school, but there was enough massive people that we started to get a high school. And then the other thing that happened in this school, right around, 1988, 89, is that suddenly there was a lot of Russian speakers around. During the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Jews were all the Jews were scrambling to get out. It was easiest to go to Israel, but many of them wanted to go to the States. And so then the resettlement agencies, especially the Jewish resettlement agencies in the US, like the HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Association. I think the H doesn't stand for Hebrew anymore, but that's what it used to be. They kind of didn't want to settle everybody in New York, even if that might be what the immigrants wanted. So, Russian Jewish families kind of ended up in these random places, all over the US. And Columbus, I guess, just because of word of mouth, some Russian immigrants settled, and they told some other Russian immigrants that it was a pretty good place. So we got a really big influx of Russian-speaking families. And in this photo of my entire high school graduating class, exactly 50% of the people here are Russian speakers. So I think, the idea of the Soviet Jewish exodus has been told a little bit. And certainly, there are some famous works of literature about it, such as, the work of Gary Steingart. But I felt like this story of, Russian Jews in the Midwest had not really been told. And so this was kind of my pitch to it. This is still the title and the and the subtitle, although the second subtitle I kind of was a little bit too clever, and that is no longer attached to the project, as they say. So so the title is Glasnost Kids, and it's how post-Soviet child immigrants and other schmoes in our 30s, which I started it when I was in my 30s, although I have to say I'm not anymore, are saving / killing Judaism. Sorry, a timer is going off and I have to go touch it. So yeah, so again, there's a big element of autobiography to it as well. So I trace also my family tree, because one of the things I'm exploring is, what is Jewish identity nowadays? Like, has the post-Soviet exit had an impact on what Jewish identity means? And the people who are, post-Soviet child refugees and are my age, what choices are they making vis-a-vis their Jewish identity? So this is an example of some of the art from there that I kind of am meshing a bunch of my different styles, and one of them is a kind of, Scott McCloudy strolling, talking avatar type person who, her environment shifts to be whatever she needs it to be based on whatever she's talking about. But continue to do short projects. So this is a different thing that I did for the Nib, the website, the Nib, just because of an extreme sort of experience I had, which was that one spring, my kids were playing outside and somebody called Child Protective Services on us and said that my kids were unsupervised and being neglected. So we did go through a whole investigation and home visit and stuff, and it was just really, really scary, because it was at the same time that the border separations were just starting up under Donald Trump. And so, the idea that, somebody could take your kids away for absolutely no reason, and then, they would just become orphans forever, was definitely something that I was thinking about. And then, being in Canada, there's definitely a history of this with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. So I wanted to work in the larger context, and it is just about how my family was very frightened for a week and then things were fine. But to kind of use that to talk about, we kind of got a peek behind this very scary curtain that, many families are not fine, and many families don't have the privileges that we have in order for this to just be, 1 week in their lives. And so that one was actually nominated for an Eisner, but it was nominated for an Eisner in 2020. So this is the photo of me at the Eisner ceremony, which means, in front of my computer in my living room. And I actually put on my wedding dress and sat in front of my computer just to amuse myself. And it didn't win, but again, this picture of me in my wedding dress in my very messy living room in 2020 is another highlight of my comics career. And but that same year, this anthology edited by the late Diane Newman, that I had a short story and did win the Eisner. So I'm also very proud of that I was able to be in this volume. And around the same time, I got contacted, and she just found me through Google by a professor of Germanics at the University of Victoria on Vancouver Island, that she was putting together a project that would be like a witness account of the Holocaust by living survivors, but they would be paired with graphic novelists to tell their stories. And so I think that, I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, but for a long time I kind of felt like actively resisting, talking about the Holocaust in comics at all, because I feel like the shadow of Art Spiegelman is very large. But she pitched it to me, and this project just sounded so interesting, and I love, I'm really into history, and my grandfather that I was very close to and was a Holocaust survivor had, recently died. And it kind of made me feel like, it is now or never for a lot of Holocaust survivors. And I did want to be part of this project. So yeah, they were able to put together a government funding and do a lot of, really support this project. This is from the website of the project that is still up there. So you can see me talking to David Schaefer, who became my co-creator on the comic that we made. And they did film it, and they kind of really documented every stage of it, because then they said that, having all these, they wanted to document the process so that it could be used maybe for other people who are doing eyewitness accounts of maybe other genocides or other events. So, and I also had like a research assistant when I was making my comic, and it was it was one of my again, like one of my favorite experiences in making a comic that was collaborative, but was collaborative with so many different kind of parts. And I just felt that, it was collaborative, but I, as an artist, was also given a lot of freedom and a lot of control. So in these two in the center are, some of the very few pictures of my co-author of the survivor, David Schaefer, that survive. And so like it was him as a baby, then him as a 6-year-old, but most of the story he's like 10 to 14. So, but that was kind of what I had to go on for my character designs. And you can kind of see, this is all one page. This is all the development of one page. So on the top, my left, that's kind of my first sketch, where I took the text from his transcripts. And this part that stood out for me on this forced march was his father kind of seeing that another guy who's carrying a baby or a toddler is stumbling, and the father kind of takes the baby so that the other man can keep walking. So at first that was the part that occurred to me, that kind of stood out to me. But then I decided that I did want to stretch it out into more than one panel, so that you could also just get the sense of the forced march just being long, very long. And so I drew that on paper, and then these colored bits are when I scanned it into my computer and started digitally penciling. In the past few years, like 5 years, I guess, I got a Cintiq and have been kind of learning about digital art, although I do most of my finished pages by hand. But I've found that digital art for me is good for penciling, because it doesn't have to look good and it's just endlessly editable. And then these two bottom pictures are, visual references that I was able to find, or my research assistant was able to find, of Romanian soldiers, to see like exactly what do the Romanian soldiers wear in that period. If other people do like military history comics, you probably know about the Osprey series of the, so yeah, I didn't know about it before, but I discovered it, and that's what, certainly that's what the ink, like the drawing is from the Osprey book about Romanian army in World War II. And then further refining this one page, now it's 4 panels that kind of go down the page, because I felt like the passage of time, right? I needed to break it up even further. And so I show it from these 4 different angles. And then you can see the finished page. So the finished page is in watercolor. And because I much prefer the look of that, and I actually like the fact that I have a little bit less control when I'm doing my finals. Like I have a very sort of rigorous step-by-step process before I go to final inks. And then when I go to final drawing and inks, then I kind of let the randomness come in a little bit. Yeah, and so that book was published this year, in English and also in German. So we found a German publisher at the same time as the English publisher, and I was able to go to like a book launch at a comics festival in Germany. That was really great. I had never been to Germany, and it's been very well received in Germany. I feel like I get news items all the time that I can't read, so I think it's been quite well received in Germany. Where obviously, young adults have a Holocaust curriculum and everything. And so they're kind of they're used to reading these kinds of stories, like they're open to these kinds of stories. In the US and Canada a little bit, but maybe in Germany even more for obvious reasons. So the English edition is doing pretty well also, but it seems like the German edition is doing really well. Okay, that's not the end of show. Ugh. Okay, so I actually did have a longer slideshow, but it was saved on the cloud, and I guess it was only partially saved on the cloud. Let me see if I can open it up again in PowerPoint and find the last bit, find the reading that I wanted to do. See if it'll come up now. Yes, here we go. Good, good. So yeah, so the last thing I want to do, if that is all right, if it doesn't run us over time, is to do a reading from Glasnost Kids, my work that is still in progress. And it's kind of the major thing I'm working on right now. So can you still see my screen and everything?
We're seeing your face right now.
Okay.
You have to share.
Yeah, I guess I got to reshare my screen. Okay. Is it all right? Do we have enough time? I don't have to do a reading.
Oh, as much time as you want.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now, do you see the sort of Miriam avatar person sitting in a chair and holding some little golden books?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, so this is just an excerpt from kind of a middle chapter, where it kind of starts with a storybook style narrative about the personalities of activist leaders fighting for religious freedom, and especially exit visas for Soviet Jews in the 1960s and 70s. So it starts with a story. It's kind of introduces Jacob Birnbaum and Meir Kahane, the moderate, liberal, and extreme right poles of the American Soviet Jewry movement. So, okay, I guess I don't have the full reading here. But yeah, so I guess I'll just summarize what's in these panels because I don't remember the exact text. So Jacob Birnbaum is a refugee from he is I don't think he's a refugee from World War II. I think he's younger than that, but he moved. So his family moved to Israel, to England right before the war broke out, and then they actually worked in resettling other refugees after the war. Then he moved to the US, and he was very inspired by civil rights leaders. So you have John Lewis, you have Martin Luther King. Shoot, forgot the woman's name. And he kind of started the first mass protest movement out of Yeshiva University in New York, where he led Yeshiva University students in these big public marches about the lack of religious freedom for Jews in the Soviet Union. So this is based on a photo of one of those, and these marches became very large, and Jews were not really a political force at that time. There wasn't a Jewish bloc or the Jewish vote or anything like that, or any sort of Jewish action committees. And so these mass protests were really a real turning point in how the Jews could be organized in the US, and it was for the cause of Soviet Jewry. So Natan Sharansky, whose story is also in this book, he recalls this moment. He recalls seeing it from afar. And this, luckily, I do have his quote in here. He says, "Jews on both sides of the Iron Curtain stood hesitant to act. Soviet Jews feared immediate cruel oppression from the authorities, while the American Jewish establishment's leaders feared damaging the Soviet Jews with their public actions. But Birnbaum had the faith of Nachshon, ready to leap first," and that refers to a legend about like the first guy to leap into the Red Sea before it parted. He knew that the sea would part because he had righteousness on his side. And so, yeah, so at the same time as these things were taking place in the early 60s, the Soviet Jews inside the Soviet Union were also getting kind of emboldened by learning more about the Holocaust, like the extent of the Nazi killing of Jews was not really widespread public knowledge for a couple of decades, for like a decade and a half after the war. But the shock of the full coming to light kind of stirred up Jews all over the world. So this tells about some friends in the Soviet Union who hatched a plot to steal a plane, hijack a plane, and they were going to fly to Sweden and claim asylum. And they wanted to steal as small a plane as possible because they really didn't want to hijack any Soviet civilians. Or even the pilots. They were going to kick off the pilots because one of them had his pilot license. So they wanted to do this completely non-violently, and just really be making a statement with them stealing a plane and flying to Sweden. So they called it Operation Wedding because the cover story was going to be that they were all flying to a wedding. They were all people who knew each other, and they were going to fly to a wedding in this small plane, and then they would like threaten the pilots and tie them up and then take the plane away. But their plot was not very secret. It involved like 18 people. So according to the Russians, they pretty much knew about it from the beginning. So as soon as these groups started to travel to the airfield, the police descended on them and they were put on trial. But the kind of publicizing this trial really backfired because they were again able to really make a statement by being put on trial. And like they spoke in Hebrew during this trial and used biblical quotes, or I guess or liturgical quotes anyways. I'm not sure if this one's actually biblical, but it's from a famous song, religious song. They were just very defiant and they did not ask for mercy. And so it was they did end up making a statement, even though they were all caught and thrown in jail. And then I talk about Meir Kahane, who's definitely a less heroic figure, but some people still credit him with getting US attention on Soviet Jewry. So he grew up in New York, and he was actually also inspired by African-American leaders, but he was really inspired by the Black Panthers and the more militant side. While he consciously emulated them and their leather jackets and stuff, but also at the same time he was definitely did not like he was definitely racist and believed terrible things about Black people, and that they were all coming to murder you in your beds, but they also had some rhetoric he could steal. So in fact, one of his first actions was a Black intellectual had been invited to a synagogue to speak about reparations to African Americans. And so Kahane came with a bunch of his teenage thugs and threatened to disrupt this and have violence at this event. Because he hated Black people, he hated liberal Jews certainly as well. Anybody who might think about the victimization of other people rather than only the victimization of Jews. So he but he really liked the spotlight. He liked to get arrested for these actions and to show up with people threatening violence. And so he was into the public actions and the violence before he was into the cause of Soviet Jewry. But I guess, inspired by Jacob Birnbaum and the fact that he could get a crowd, he became part of the cause for Soviet Jewry and did some very splashy actions, including like chain themselves to a Russian plane at the airfield. And then his people planted a bomb at a ticket office for the Russian ballet. And they actually killed a woman who was working as a secretary there. So it was, people from that group came and they left a suitcase there and then ran away. That's a little figure in the door. and exploded this office just because this office handled tickets for the Russian ballet. And the secretary who they killed happened to be Jewish, but I'm sure they were fine with that. And then he moved to Israel, and then he became a celebrated politician in Israel, and probably continued being a terrorist as well. His followers still to this day are among people who, are killing Palestinian civilians, not, people who are settlers and kill Palestinian civilians or set fire to orchards and stuff of Palestinians are often followers of this guy. So he was assassinated when he was on a speaking tour in the US, but his influence in Israel still lives on. He was elected to the Knesset in 1984 on a platform of stripping non-Jews of Israeli citizenship, such as people with, one Jewish parent or one Jewish grandparent, and introducing quote unquote Talmudic law. His party was banned for racist incitement in 1985. Kahane was killed by an Egyptian American gunman while on a speaking tour in New York in 1990. So then I say, we'll come back to that. The bleeding hearts and the Jewish supremacists, never forget versus never again. What is Miriam Libicki up to in 1990? So this goes to a flashback of singing Odavinu Chai, which was just a very simple, again, biblical passage put to music, but that had become one of these protest anthems in the US and in the Soviet Union. So this is our choir director. Our fundraiser at the JCC is in a week. Make sure you have a nice white shirt, a navy skirt, or pants. Mama, we need to go shopping for a ring. Here, she's coming home. Oh, I forgot. Okay, I think I have this in my text of how. Okay. Привет, Penny. Vyezhnale Puchimo. Mama, it's one of your Russians. She was calling all yesterday too. I just started hanging up. Miri, don't do that. I told you how to say I'm not home. Penny nizdies. Can you say Penny nizdies? And then back to a choir scene. Look, I know you're from Ohio, but try to sing ours and yours. Yours, not yours. That is that, and I will stop the share. So yeah, kind of melding different art styles, different streams of the narrative, and then as well with my, regular autobio stuff is in there as well. So it does have a bunch of flashbacks that kind of follow my character up to the age of her writing the book. And yeah, still in progress. It's very complicated. I think I prefer to work on shorter things, but I had this big ambitious project because I was doing my master's, and now I'm stuck till it's finished.
Well, we'd like to really thank you for coming and doing such a wonderful presentation and working around the time problems. And I really appreciate it. And I know everybody here at Cartoonists Northwest, I've seen your work for years and seen various emails and things about what you've been busy with. But I just thought that, it would be really, really wonderful to share you with Cartoonists Northwest. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me.
Oh, definitely a pleasure. Thank you. And if anybody had any questions.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you said that it's hard to write about the Holocaust because of Art Spiegelman. Could you talk more about that? Like, you've done it, but
right. Yeah, no, I think that that's probably the most famous graphic novel in the English language is Mouse. And so that to be not only a Holocaust story, but a secondhand, second generation Holocaust story, I feel that it does just loom really large over it. And I feel like, myself as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, you also don't want to feel like you're exploiting, somebody else's suffering for the cred. You're like, oh, me too, Art Spiegelman. Like, I have intergenerational trauma. So yeah, I think that's that was part of it. Like, I feel like, then if you write a Holocaust story, are you competing with Art Spiegelman? Like, are you going to be compared? And like, he's definitely a genius at what he does, and he's got a very distinct style. So that's kind of why I felt like I should avoid it.
Do you feel you've been compared?
Well, yeah, like there's blurbs on the
Yeah.
book which says
Oh.
the best since Art Spiegelman, which again,
Oh.
like, I kind of wish that was not a cartoonist that wrote that. That was a historian. So I think if it was a
Oh.
cartoonist, they would have known better than to write that. But because I feel like, yeah, again, like you don't want to say that. It's like being called, the best since Michael Jordan or something.
But you are
But certainly
you're
other people
sharing the
have-
stories.
right.
Certainly other people have written graphic novels
Yeah,
about
that's
the
true as
Holocaust.
well. Like Miriam Katine, who wrote We Are on Our Own. That's one of my favorite books. And then she wrote Letting It Go, which is also about kind of much more about the aftermath. And that's also a great book. And in fact, her crayon drawing or her colored pencil drawing style really influenced me, and she's great. So yeah, it's I mean, I'm definitely not saying no one else should, but myself, I had hang-ups because I had all these associations in my mind.
Okay, thank you.
I think you did such a wonderful presentation because you described your art and what you used and how you developed. You might just have answered all the questions. Does anybody else have anything? That was really, really thorough and well done.
I wouldn't say that I have any questions, but I feel like you opened up my mind to a broader world.
Thank you.
Definitely.
So are you teaching now?
Yes, yeah, I'm that's kind of my day job at this time. So
Like,
that
what do you teach?
so I do teach at my old art school, Emily Carr University of Art and Design. So now they have an illustration department, and now people who make comics can be a lot more out about it. They couldn't, a decade and a half ago. And so I teach in the illustration department. I have taught comics classes, but these days I seem to get asked to teach more humanities type classes. I guess, I've just got a lecturing type of approach, as you may have been able to guess. So I've taught, like, I teach professional practices. So like, careers in illustration is the main one I teach. Plus I also got to teach one that was really fun about like the history and aesthetics of memoir comics, like all around the globe. That was a really fun class.
Cool.
Well, fantastic. Well, anyway, if that's everything, I thank you once again, Miriam, for a wonderful talk.
Yeah. So I have 3 books that are, published and available and easy to buy. So that's Jobnik, which is the self-published graphic novel, but it's on Amazon. And then there's Toward a Hot Jew, which was published by Fantagraphics, that also you can get through, any online book retailer and Amazon and the Fantagraphics site. And then But I Live, which is the new one, which I have one story in it, but then there's 2 other stories of other graphic artists working with Holocaust survivors. Plus there's like essays by historians to contextualize things. And there's a really fun afterword by the artist, which is like we do it in the form of a jam comic, where we talk about, working on this project. So that is published by the University of Toronto Press. So that one you probably won't see in comic shops, but also like online, it's not hard to get. So yeah, so if you're interested, you can definitely read my stuff. And yeah, and some of my essays have been posted online as well, like the one about getting investigated by child services is still up on the nib. That one's called Who Gets Called an Unfit Mother. So if you want to search for that, you can find it.
Where is that available?
On the nib. So the nib is it's a political cartooning and sort of first person comicking site. I bet I can find, if my internet is working right now, I will find a link to it. Yes, I have a link right here. And I will put that in the chat. So that is something of mine that you can read for free and right away.
Copy that to my Gmail so I can see it.
Yeah.
Great.
Got it. I'm always getting in here really quickly.
Well,
Never is a good link.
thanks for the link to that unfit mother story. Yeah, my daughter works as a in Portland with court
Oh,
cases
geez.
with mothers who are charged with being unfit mothers. So I really appreciate that link. I'll send it to her.
Yeah, hopefully she will enjoy it. Like, yeah, I've mostly gotten good responses from it. There's a few, but luckily, like, so it was published on the Nib, and I just kind of stayed off social media for a couple weeks after that. And like, I definitely went through my Twitter and took all my kids' pictures and names off of my social media at that point.
Yeah.
And then it was published in Geist, which is a kind of a Canadian arts magazine. And they were like, we got some mail if you want to see it. And I was like, nope, don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but the responses I've been able to see, many of them were good, including like from my friends, because I feel like it is such a thing, it's such a shameful thing that I heard from a few of my friends. They're like, it happened to me, and they would never have told me that under normal circumstances, because it's not something you could tell someone, probably.
No. Yeah.
Are men ever charged with being unfit fathers?
Right. That's a funny thing, because I guess I'm sure there are, but my experience of people coming out to me after this essay was only women. And many times it was, during a divorce, during like a sort of a custody but also the funny thing is, even though, myself and my husband are not divorced and we fully live together and everything, the child services never they never spoke to him. Like, they never asked for his phone number. They never tried to talk to him. He was viewed as fully extraneous to this whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I have to say that it was just a really paranoid time. Like, it was a week, that we kind of were crazy, because it was a week between the phone call and the visit, and then the house visit was pretty awful. The way that they like took the kids into separate rooms to see what secrets they could get out of them.
Yeah.
And then for like 2 months afterward, they were like, this case is, or 3 months, they were like, this case is still open. And so then I had to, like, if there was, a police car going by, I was like, oh, are they coming for me? But nothing really happened in those 3 months. And then we heard 3 months later, this case is closed. And we're like, okay. So it was really, most of it was, just happening in my own mind. But that was kind of what I was examining also, is the way that, these interventions can make you feel, so frightened and also so guilty all the time. But I definitely, with the essay, wanted to also bring attention to, people who definitely have it much worse.
Well, I'm sorry you had to write it, but I'm looking forward to reading it now that I have access to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Miriam.
Oh, no
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.